The first day was always the hardest, and for McCade Hunter, stepping into the halls of Jefferson High wasn't just a career move. It was a challenge, a battlefield, a storm he had chosen to walk into with both eyes wide open. Word about Room 3C traveled faster than gossip in a high school cafeteria. Teachers warned him with quiet sympathy and side-eyed concern that the class was a revolving door of broken chalk, crushed spirits, and resignation letters. Not a single teacher had survived more than a semester. Some left in tears, others left in ambulances, and one even left mid-lesson, never to return. The reason? 3 names are Trey Bishop, Jess Carver, and Malik Knox. They weren't just students, they were a regime. Trey was the loud one, the leader, quarterback with a god complex and a smirk that could curdle milk. Jess was the venom, smart, beautiful, and devastatingly cruel with her words. Malik was the shadow, always watching, always quiet, the type who knew more than he let on. Together, they controlled the class like a cartel. Extortion, blackmail, humiliation. If you went with them, you were against them. Cade knew all this walking in, but he didn't flinch. His boots echoed down the tiled corridor like a slow drumbeat of change. A former military strategist turned teacher, Cade didn't come with an apple and a smile. He came with disciplined strategy and something the students weren't used to. Unshakable presence. He opened the door to room 3C and stepped inside. Silence fell. Trey, lounging with his feet on the desk, didn't even bother to sit up. Jess rolled her eyes so hard it looked like a medical emergency. Malik didn't move, just watched. Cade walked to the board, uncapped a marker and wrote only 2 words, Hunter. Observe. No introduction, no rules, just a challenge. The room tensed, confused, as if waiting for him to stumble into the trap. Tree snorted. Another substitute with a hero complex. Give it a week, he said to the class, grinning. He'll be crying in his car by Thursday. Laughter followed, forced and cruel. Cade turned, locked eyes with Trey, and replied flatly, 60 seconds. The laughter died, puzzled. That's all it'll take. Cade continued, pacing slowly across the room like a lion entering another lion's den. 60 seconds, and you'll remember me for the rest of your lives. Jess smirked. Please, you're not that special. Malik leaned forward slightly, intrigued. Cade pulled out a small black remote from his pocket and pressed a button. A massive screen descended from the ceiling. Images began to flash. Photos of war zones, detention centers, and finally a video. It showed a younger Cade disarming a gang of inmates with but his voice and 2 locked arms. The room went deathly quiet. That was me. 4 years ago. I taught juvenile offenders how to survive themselves. What makes you think I'm afraid of you? He asked. The silence grew heavier. Tree's grin wavered, Jess looked away. Malik's eyes narrowed. Cade continued. You've ruled this room because they let you. That ends today. I'm not here to babysit, I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to teach. And you will listen. Still no one moved. No one dared. The power in the room had shifted like a tonic plate snapping back into place. Then, with eerie calm, Cade turned and wrote the word, respect, under his name. You don't have to like me, he said. But you will respect this room, and each other. Trey opened his mouth, but no sound came. Jess tapped her pen, pretending to be unfazed. Malik. He smiled just a little, the kind of smile that meant trouble was now interested in the troublemaker. The bell rang, but no one stood. It was as if they had all forgotten how. Cade nodded. Tomorrow we start. If you're late, don't bother coming in. If you're loud, you're gone. If you try to challenge me again, he glanced at Trey, I promise you'll lose more than your pride. As the students left, their swagger noticeably dulled. Jess turned to Trey. He's bluffing, she muttered. Trey didn't respond. His jaw clenched. He hated being one-upped. He hated being afraid. But more than that, he hated the look Malik gave Cade, as if he'd found someone worth following. After class, the whispers started. Some students were excited. Some were terrified. Others were already plotting. But Cade knew all of it. He expected it, and he prepared for it. That night, Trey called a meeting. Jess, Malik, and two others who always ran backup. "We take him down," Trey said. "We find his weakness." "Everyone has won," Jess smirked. "You're forgetting he's not scared of us." "Then we make him scared," Trey growled. Malik said nothing, just stared at the door as if Cade might walk in at any second. The next day, the games began. First, Jess hacked the smartboard and played an embarrassing remix of Cade's intro video. Cade didn't flinch. He let it play, arms crossed, then quietly played a new video showing the expulsion of 3 students from his last school. "For cyberbullying. They thought it was funny too," he said. Second, Trey started spreading rumors. Cade was ex-military discharged for mental health issues. Cade responded by holding an impromptu lesson on PTSD, sharing his real story and opening a dialogue. Some students, surprisingly, thanked him. Trey watched his army shrink. Jess started a petition. It got 5 signatures. One was forged. By Wednesday, Malik followed Cade into his office. "Why are you really here?" he asked. Cade looked him dead in the eyes. "Because you remind me of who I used to be, and I refuse to let you waste your life in shadows." Malik said nothing, but that night he deleted the group chat Trey had started. On Thursday, Trey tried one last tactic: humiliate Cade in front of the school during assembly. But when he tried to access the projector system, the login failed. The password had been changed by Malik. Cade took the stage instead, giving a speech not about rules, but about redemption. "Bullies," he said, "aren't born. They're built, and they can be unbuilt, but only if someone shows them how." That was it. The turning point. Trey stood up to shout something, anything, but was met with silence. The crowd didn't boo. They didn't laugh. They just watched. For the first time, Trey felt what it was like to be truly alone. Jess walked away, furious. Malik stayed seated, arms crossed, and nodded once toward Cade. And Cade, he simply said, "Time's up. 60 seconds. That's all it took. Not for domination, but for transformation. Not to instill fear, but to demand respect." The bullies had tried to break the new teacher. Instead, they found someone who refused to break. Someone who had already been broke and rebuilt himself stronger. Someone who showed them that control through cruelty was weakness disguised as power. The whispers in the halls changed. So did the energy in room 3C. By Friday, students came in on time. Phones stayed in pockets, and Trey, still seething, sat in the middle row, jaw tight but eyes forward. The war wasn't over, but the first battle had been won. And the teacher, he was just getting started. The tension didn't dissolve overnight. Respect was earned, not gifted, and Cade Hunter knew better than to believe one battle had won the war. The students of room 3C had been shaken, yes, but not broken. Tree Bishop, in particular, wore the bruise to his ego like a fresh scar. And with each hour that passed without retaliation, his need to reassert dominance became a festering infection. He wasn't used to being ignored, and now that Malik, the one he counted on to follow, had defected, the betrayal burned deeper than anything Cade could have inflicted. On Monday morning, Trey walked into class with the swagger of someone still pretending to be king, but his eyes betrayed him. There was calculation in them now, not confidence. Cade was already at the board, writing a quote in long, deliberate strokes. "Power is not given. It is taken," then tempered with purpose. He didn't turn when Tree walked in late. He didn't scold. He didn't speak. And that silence cut deeper than any reprimand. Jess followed next, her hair tied up with surgical precision, chewing gum like it was her last rebellion. Her heels clicked with defiance, but even she hesitated before sitting. The rest of the students entered quickly, eyes forward, the air thick with something unsaid. Cade turned from the board, clapped his hands once, and said, "Today we study conflict." That one word turned every head. It wasn't subtle. It was a message wrapped in curriculum. He passed out copies of Lord of the Flies, and as groans echoed, he said, "This isn't just fiction. It's a warning. It's what happens when leadership is abused, when fear is currency." His eyes settled briefly on Trey, who met the gaze but flinched. This book, Cade continued, will teach you more about yourselves than any textbook. You'll see who you are when rules fall away. But first, let's discuss our own island. This room. That's when it began. The clash wasn't loud, at least not at first. It started with passive defiance. Trey refused to read. Jess made snide comments. A few students tested boundaries. Whispers, doodles, side conversations, but Cade didn't react. He taught through it, around it, or over it, until the resistance had no audience left, and then, like a well-timed explosion, Trey stood up in the middle of a discussion. "Why do we have to read about boys stuck on an island?" he snapped. "Why should we care about some made-up story?" The class froze. Jess smirked. Malik didn't look up. Cade walked slowly toward Trey, stopping inches away. "Because those boys were just like you," he said quietly. "They thought they were invincible. They thought they could rule by fear. Until the fire got out of control, until one of them died, until they realized that civilization isn't a luxury. It's a choice." Tree scoffed. "So we're savages now." "You'll tell me," Cade said. "Would savages throw a chair?" It was a trap, and Tree took the bait. In one motion he flipped his desk, sending books scattering. Jess gasped, startled even though she had goaded him. Malik stood up, but Cade raised a hand. "Sit," he said, not to Malik but to Trey. The authority in that single syllable was devastating. Trey hesitated. The class held its breath, and then, for the first time in years, Trey obeyed, slowly, angrily, but he sat. Cade crouched beside the overturned desk, lifted it calmly, placed the books back and said, "Now that you've made your point, let's get back to the book." It wasn't victory, it was strategy. Trey had shown his hand. Cade had revealed the counter. But beneath that calm, the storm had only begun. That afternoon, Trey met with Jess behind the gym. "We need to take this to the next level," he said. "If we can't scare him, we destroy his reputation." Jess nodded slowly. "I know someone. She hacks teacher records for fun." By nightfall, they had accessed a portion of Cade's past. A sealed incident report from his military file. It mentioned a student suicide attempt after a disciplinary session led by Cade. The full story was redacted, but the headline was enough. By Tuesday morning, the image was everywhere. Shared via airdrop, posted in bathroom stalls, printed and left on lockers. Hunter, the teacher who pushed a kid too far. When Cade walked in, the room was whispering. Pages rustled. Phones slid quickly into pockets. He saw the photocopy tacked to the board, walked up, tore it down, and didn't say a word. Instead, he wrote one word on the boarding: truth. Then he turned. "Oh, you think you've uncovered something dark," he said. "You have no idea what darkness is." A long pause. "That student, his name was Miles. He'd been abused at home. I was the only person he trusted. When he broke down, it happened on my watch. That's the truth. But what you don't know is that he survived, and he's now studying psychology to help kids like himself. He met each pair of eyes, one by one, and don't know the whole story, and you weaponized pain you didn't understand." No one spoke, not even Trey. Jess looked down. Malik leaned forward and said quietly, "What happened to the people who leaked that?" Cade's smile didn't reach his eyes. "They learned that digital footprints never fade, and that libel is still a crime." That day, the principal was called. Trey and Jess were questioned, but Cade didn't press charges. "They need to learn, not be punished," he told the principal. Not yet. The move stunned everyone. Mercy wasn't expected, and mercy wielded by strength was more disarming than any punishment. By Wednesday, the dynamic had changed again. Jess stopped talking. Trey came in early but sat in the back. Malik stayed behind after class and said, "Why didn't you bury them?" Cade shrugged. "Because if I crush them now, they'll never grow. They'll just harden." Malik nodded slowly. "You think Tree can change? I think everyone can change, if they're given a reason." That night, Malik invited Cade to watch him at his boxing gym. What Cade saw was not just potential. It was rage, shaped into discipline. "You fight like someone who's been fighting his whole life," Cade said. Malik didn't deny it. My brother got locked up. I promised I wouldn't end up like him. Cade put a hand on his shoulder. You won't, as long as you don't forget that promise. By Thursday, the class was reading, discussing, engaging. Cade had them acting out scenes, debating morality, comparing the book's conflicts to their own lives. And then something miraculous happened. Trey raised his hand. What if Jack wasn't evil? He asked. Huh, what if he just didn't want to be ignored anymore? Cade nodded. Exactly. Conflict doesn't always come from hatred. Sometimes it comes from fear, from pain, from being forgotten. The room was silent. Then Tree said quietly, I used to like reading. Before it was lame, Cade replied. It was never lame. You were just told it was. And just like that, a spark lit in a heart long covered in ice. Friday arrived like the eye of a storm, calm, clear, but still dangerous. Jess didn't show up. Rumor was her parents had grounded her after the principal's call. Trey walked in with his hands in his pockets, his head down, but he sat in the front row. Malik handed in his essay early. The room began to hum, not with rebellion but with transformation. Cade stood before them and said, This week wasn't about literature, it was about choice. Every day you wake up and choose who you want to be. A leader, a follower, a destroyer, a builder. You chose to challenge me. I chose not to destroy you. What will you choose next week? For the first time, they had no answer. And that was good. It meant they were thinking. As the bell rang, Cade packed up slowly. Trey lingered. Hey, he said. Idagag, I was wrong. About you. Cade nodded. You were angry. So was I once. Trey looked down. Is it true? That kid, Miles, did he really forgive you? He didn't have to, because I forgave myself first. Trey didn't speak, just nodded, then left, and as he did, Cade looked out at the hallway, filled with the chaos of teenagers, the echo of lockers slamming, and thought, not bad for week one, not bad at all. The calm after the storm was brief, more like the hush before a battle than true peace, and while the students of room 3C began to thaw in the warmth of mistard, Cade Hunter's quiet strength, the undercurrents of conflict hadn't vanished. They had only shifted, retreating into shadows where old loyalties brewed resentment and broken egos plotted resurgence. Trey Bishop, despite his earlier softening, wasn't ready to surrender his crown, and though his pride had been pierced, it had not been extinguished. Something more dangerous now replaced the brash defiance of his earlier confrontations with Cady. Calculated retaliation, the kind that simmered beneath the surface of every forced smile, every obedient gesture in class. It began with whispers in the hallways, rumors laced with half-truths, phrases twisted into poison, spoken just loudly enough to spread. Hunter's a fake. Guy played soldier but cracked when it got real. Did you hear he got kicked out, not retired? He's just doing this teacher thing, 'cause no one else would hire him. Cade heard it all. He saw the eyes following him, the sideways glances, the locker doors that slammed harder when he walked by. He'd dealt with enemies before, but nothing quite like the high school rumor mill. Silent assassins armed with gossip and the insatiable hunger for drama. Jess returned that Monday, quieter, more cautious, but still watching, observing Cade the way a snake studies a fire, wary but not yet deterred. She sat 2 seats from Trey now instead of 1, and the unspoken space between them held more tension than a drawn bow. Malik noticed it too. He had started hanging back more often after class, asking questions that weren't always about literature. You think they're planning something? He asked Cade one afternoon, when the classroom was empty except for the 2 of them and the humming buzzes of fluorescent lights. Planning or pretending not to, Cade replied. Both are dangerous. Malik nodded, jaw tight. You want me to keep an ear out? Cade looked at him, really looked, and said, I want you to keep being who you're becoming. Don't go backwards trying to protect me. Just stay alert. Malik grinned, a little crooked. You say that like it's easy. It's not, Cade said, but it's worth it. That Wednesday, everything changed. It started with fire, not metaphorical, but real. A trash can in the east stairwell had been set ablaze during third period. No one was hurt, and the sprinkler system killed it quickly, but the evacuation disrupted the day. As students stood shivering outside, murmuring theories, Cade watched the hallway cameras being reviewed by campus security. The footage was blurry, distorted by smoke and shadows, but the frame just before the fire began caught a familiar silhouette. A slim figure, hoodie up, unmistakable walk. Jess. She wasn't arrested, not formally, but she was escorted to the office and suspended pending investigation. Her father came storming through the front office like a cyclone, barking threats of lawsuits and claiming innocence, but Principal Marlin's face said he didn't believe a word of it. That night, the real war began. Cade's classroom was vandalized, books shredded, desks overturned, a vulgar word carved into the whiteboard. At the center of the destruction was a single item, a photograph of Cade from his military days, torn down the middle and smeared with ink. It had been taken from his locked desk drawer. A message, clear and cruel. The next morning, students stood in stunned silence at the doorway of room 30, faces pale. Cade arrived minutes later, surveyed the damage, and did something no one expected. He walked in, picked up a broom, and began to clean. No yelling, no lectures, just slow, methodical restoration. Malik joined first, wordlessly grabbing a trash bag. Then came Tessa from the front row. Then Kaylee. One by one, students stepped in to undo the chaos. Trey did not. He stood outside the doorway, watching. When the cleanup ended, Cade stood before them with a voice steadier than steel. They wanted to send a message, he said. But they forgot something. You cannot break what has already rebuilt itself. I've stood in countries torn apart by war. I've watched villages burned, people lost, communities fractured, and I've watched them rise again, not because someone told them to, but because they chose to. You have that choice, too, every day. Right now. He left it at that. No further lectures. No accusations. He resumed class, teaching from a whiteboard, still bearing faint scratches from the vandalism, but with students now leaning in, focused, aware that this was no longer just about school. It was about loyalty, about standing for something bigger. Still, Trey was not done. The next week, he escalated. A series of pranks unfolded across campus, glue in locker locks, the PA system hijacked with audio clips mocking teachers, fire alarms triggered during lunch. None of it could be pinned on him directly, but everyone knew. Cade never reacted publicly. But privately, he noticed Malik was looking increasingly frustrated. "I'm tired of this man," Malik said one afternoon. "He's a coward. Why do you let it slide?" Cade leaned back in his chair. "Because if I strike now, he wins. I become the enemy he's trying to make me out to be. But if I wait, he'll unravel himself." That unraveling came sooner than expected. Trey made a mistake, one rooted in arrogance. He targeted someone else. Not Cade, not a teacher, but Malik's younger sister. She was a freshman, quiet, sweet. She found a note in her locker that said, "You'll never be as tough as your brother. Better watch your back." It was anonymous typed, but Malik knew. Everyone knew, and when Malik confronted Trey in the cafeteria, it erupted. Chairs flew. Shouts rose. Teachers tried to intervene, but the crowd formed a ring around them, like spectators at a gladiator match. Cade arrived seconds later, voice booming, you chew." The room froze, not because of volume, because of presence. Cade stepped between them, eyes fierce, breath steady. "This ends now," he said. "Malik, go outside." Malik, chest heaving, obeyed. Trey, defiant, refused. "He started it?" "No," Cade said. "You did. When you crossed a line no decent man crosses." Trey's jaw tightened. "You think you know what a man is?" Cade stepped closer. "I know exactly what one is. A man protects. Builds, leads. He doesn't threaten girls and hide behind jokes." For a second, Trey looked like he might swing, but something in Cade's eyes stopped him. That night, Trey was suspended, not expelled. Cade fought for that. He needs discipline, not damnation, he told the principal. But the message was clear. There were lines that couldn't be crossed. Jess returned from her suspension and found her power diminished. Her throne, once secure beside Trey, now stood empty. She watched from a distance as the classroom she once ruled evolved without her, stronger, more united, more focused. The next week, she approached Cade after class. "I didn't light that fire," she said quietly. "But I didn't stop it either." Cade didn't flinch. "You don't need to confess to me," he said. "You need to decide who you want to be next." Jess stared at the floor. "I don't know." "That's honest," Cade said. "Honesty's a good start." Slowly, the tide turned. Room 3C wasn't perfect, but it had changed. Students began referring to it as the Island, a nickname born from their shared reading of Lord of the Flies, now repurposed into a badge of resilience. Cade kept teaching, not just curriculum, but character. The halls were still war zones, but in room 3C, there was something close to peace, hard, earned, fragile, and fierce. And then came the bombshell, an anonymous tip, a new attack, a USB drive sent to the principal containing heavily edited footage. Clips of Cade yelling during a training exercise overseas, spliced with audio of angry student outbursts, fabricated to suggest he was abusive, unstable. The district launched an inquiry. Cade was put on administrative leave. When he told the class, they sat in stunned silence. "I'll be gone for a few days," he said. "Maybe more. They need to investigate." "Investigate what?" Kaylee asked. "A lie," Malik said, voice flat. "Somebody's scared of what's changing." Cade only nodded. "The truth has a way of surviving," he said. "But sometimes it needs help." What happened next stunned the administration. Students from room 3C, led by Malik, Tessa, and even Jess, organized a defense. They filmed testimonials, created a petition, gathered over 1,000 signatures. They confronted the principal respectfully but firmly, armed with facts, witness accounts, and a quiet rage that only justice can summon. Local news picked up the story. Students defend teacher targeted by fake footage. Cade watched it from home, stunned. And then, after a week, he was reinstated, cleared, vindicated. He walked into room 3C on Monday to a standing ovation. Not orchestrated, not rehearsed, just pure, spontaneous truth. Malik hugged him. Jess whispered, "I'm sorry." Trey wasn't there. He had transferred schools, quietly, without farewell. But the war in the halls was over, and the victors hadn't won by force. They'd won by conviction. Cade stood at the front of the room, looking out at faces once hostile, now burning with purpose. "You weren't students," he said. "You were soldiers, not of war, but of integrity, and you won. Not just for me, for yourselves." And as the bell rang, and the class settled into something that finally resembled peace, Cade Hunter knew this was no longer just a teaching job. This was a mission, and it was only getting started. Safety hazard. The first day after the investigation was a strange kind of quiet, the kind of silence that carries weight. The silence after a verdict, after a storm that doesn't end in disaster but leaves everyone drenched and blinking in the light. Room 30C had changed, not just in reputation or routine, but in the feel of it. Students who once avoided the front row now arrived early to claim it. Kids who never raised their hands now stayed after class to discuss symbolism and character arcs. But while the classroom felt stronger, more unified, safety hazard, something darker still stirred the doorway. The victory over the edited footage scandal hadn't gone unnoticed. Cade's resilience had embarrassed more than just Trey and his silent allies. It had exposed a deeper rot. Somewhere behind the scenes, adults had been complicit. Someone had leaked military footage, someone with access. And while the school quietly closed the investigation into Cade, he knew there was unfinished business. He just didn't expect the next strike to come from above. 2 weeks into his return, Cade was summoned to the district office. The reason? A formal complaint from a parent alleging that Cade's teaching methods were too aggressive, psychologically manipulative, and emotionally triggering. The parent remained anonymous, but the accusations were eerily specific. They mirrored phrases Jess had used during her own breakdown months earlier. phrases she had confided in someone she thought was trustworthy. Cade didn't need a name. He knew. Superintendent Rourke, a man who had never liked Cade's hiring, who viewed his decorated service as a liability rather than an asset, and who had tried, more than once, to push traditional authority back into the classroom through rules, rubrics, and the erasure of emotional intelligence. Rourke didn't want a revolution, he wanted order. And Cade was chaos incarnate to him. When Cade returned to school the next day, he was greeted with a new memo. All lesson plans must now be submitted 2 weeks in advance. No deviation allowed without written approval. Spontaneous discussions discouraged. Projects involving emotional expression flagged. It was a slow chokehold disguised as policy, and it didn't stop there. His classroom computer was replaced, files deleted, passwords reset. The administration claimed it was a routine upgrade. But Cade wasn't Norvie. They were watching him now, not through cameras, but through red tape. The students noticed too. Malik was the first to call it out. "You ain't teaching like yourself, Mr. H," he said one afternoon, arms crossed. "You're holding back," Cade sighed. "Some fights you win by not throwing the first punch." Malik frowned. "Or you lose 'cause you never threw it at all." Jess, now sitting near the front of the class, added, "They're trying to bleed you out. Death by policy. You gonna let them?" Cade didn't answer right away. He looked at the board, the faded residue of past battles still etched faintly into the corners. Then he said, "We changed the game," and he meant it. The next week, he introduced a new project called the Legacy Assignment. Students were tasked with researching real-world figures who had faced extreme adversity and asking one question: what did they leave behind? But Cade didn't just assign reports. He turned the classroom into a war room. Each student picked a figure, but they weren't limited to textbooks. They could use interviews, documentaries, social media deep dives, whatever they needed. Jess picked Malala Yousafzai. Malik chose Colin Kaepernick. Kaylee selected Anne Frank. The room buzzed again. Rourke heard about it within days and summoned Cade. "This isn't on the curriculum." His eyes cold. "These aren't approved texts." Cade replied, "These are approved humans. A safety hazard. That's more important." Slammed the desk. "You're overstepping." Again. Cade stood firm. "You're afraid." Again. The meeting ended without resolution. But the tension was now open war. Rourke began visiting the classroom unannounced, sitting at the back with a legal pad, scribbling as Cade taught. But each time he came, the students leaned in closer. They spoke louder, more passionately. They defended their ideas with evidence, empathy, and fire. They didn't just learn, they performed. And every time Rourke tried to write a critique, all he saw were kids transformed. But he didn't back off. Instead, he weaponized the PTA. Flyers began circulating accusing Cade of indoctrination. Local news picked it up. "Teacher pushing political agenda in classroom." The headline ran next to a picture of Cade in uniform, cropped to make him look angry. That night, Cade's inbox flooded with hate mail. Some messages threatened violence. Others demanded his resignation. Malik's mother called him crying. "They're calling you a traitor," she said. "They're saying you're turning our kids against the country you fought for." Cade sat in the dark that night, staring at the inbox, the cursor blinking like a silent metronome of everything he couldn't say. But then he heard it, the ping of a new message. It was from Jess. One sentence: "We're with you." Say the word. He didn't say it right away. Instead, he returned to class the next morning and taught the walls weren't closing in. But the students weren't waiting. They had already mobilized. Jess created a YouTube video called "The Truth About Room 3C. It featured student interviews, classroom footage, and testimonials from parents. Malik shared it. Kaylee edited subtitles. Within 48 hours it went viral, 1.2 million views. Comments flooded in, thousands of them praising the teacher who had restored faith in education. Hashtags trended. The local school board scheduled an emergency meeting. The district tried to shut it down, but the students showed up. Not just 3C, students from other schools, alumni, parents. Even teachers too afraid to speak had shown up in support, wearing black and silver, the unofficial colors of Room 3C. Cade didn't plan to speak. He hadn't intended to. But as the meeting dragged into its third hour, filled with accusations and talking points, Malik stood up and said, "You don't want to hear us, but you're gonna." Then he turned to Cade. "Tell them." So Cade walked to the front. The room fell silent. Cameras rolled. He didn't have notes, just truth. "I served because I believed in something bigger than myself," he began. "When I came back, I didn't expect applause. I expected to build, and that's what I did. Room 3C is more than a classroom. It's a battleground for hope. These kids, they don't need coddling. They need courage, and we gave that to each other. If that's a threat to your system, then maybe your system's the problem." When he finished, the room exploded. Applause, cheers, tears, and in the back row, Superintendent Rourke stood frozen, watching his control evaporate. The next day, the board voted. Unanimous, all restrictions lifted. Cade fully reinstated. Superintendent Rourke was placed under review. But Cade didn't celebrate. Not right away, because for every battle won, there are scars. Some students faced backlash. Malik's college applications were delayed because of disciplinary flags. Jess's father tried to pull her from school. Kaylee received threats online, but none of them backed down. Instead, they doubled down. They created a platform, Legacy Project Live. It showcased student voices, teaching models, and weekly live streams from Room 3C. Tens of thousands subscribed. Donations poured in, and Cade. He became the mentor not just of a class, but of a movement. Still, there were quieter victories that meant more than headlines. Like the day Tree returned, not as a student, but as a visitor. He walked into Room 3C during open house week, hat in hand, shoulders tense. Cade saw him and nodded. "Didn't think you'd come." Trey looked around. "Had to see it for myself." Students noticed. Jess watched him carefully. Malik didn't move, but Trey spoke first. "I messed up," he said. "Tried to burn this place down. Now it's stronger than anything I ever built." Cade just said, "Growth isn't a straight line." Trey left without asking for forgiveness. But he left different, and that mattered. So when people ask how the tables turned, how a war zone became a sanctuary, how a target became a leader, how a class became a revolution, they don't always believe the answer. Because it wasn't a single moment. It was every moment. Every whisper that turned into a shout. Every hand raised. Every time someone stood when silence was easier. That's how the tables turned, not by flipping them in rage, but by standing on them with truth. And to everyone watching, remember, this story isn't just ours, it's yours. Because if a group of kids in one broken classroom could spark change, so can you. So don't just watch, join us. Subscribe, follow, share. Be the spark, because the next chapter, it's yours to write. The applause from the board meeting had yet faded from Cade's ears when the real weight of everything that had happened finally began to settle in. Victory, in name, had been declared, but beneath the surface, the pressure had only grown more intense. Room 30C had become a symbol of resistance, and symbols always attract attention, both supportive and dangerous. Every student who sat in those rows knew it. Every word spoken in class now rippled outward, recorded, clipped, reshed. Cade had helped them build a fire, but keeping that fire from consuming them all was another matter. The school itself had changed, not visibly at first, but in tone, in posture. Teachers who had once kept their heads down began asking questions in staff meetings. Parents from other districts wrote in, demanding to know why their children couldn't have someone like Cade. Reporters lurked at the school gates. Influencers dissected every new post on the Legacy Project Live channel. Cade should have been proud. He was proud. But he was also tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from lack of sleep, but the exhaustion that creeps in after months of battling battles you never asked for but refused to walk away from. His days were now split between teaching, defending, and constantly navigating the landmines left behind by the systems that still wanted him gone. And it was beginning to show. He found himself waking up in the middle of the night to check emails. He snapped once sharply at a student who interrupted him, something he never did before. He apologized immediately, but the damage was done. The kids could see it. Jess was the first to say it aloud. After class one day, she stayed behind, arms crossed, voice soft. "You're burning out, sir." Kay didn't argue. "I know." Jess hesitated. "What happens when you break?" That question echoed in his mind for days, because he didn't know the answer. He had always been the rock, the anchor. But what happens when the anchor cracks? What happens when the protector needs protecting? It didn't help that the attacks hadn't stopped. Rourke may have been sidelined, but his influence lingered. Anonymous letters continued to show up. A smear article was published in Fringe paper, claiming Cade had falsified parts of his military record. It was complete fiction, but enough to get picked up by a national commentator who loved to stir outrage. Cade's phone rang constantly. His face was plastered on thumbnails that used words like indoctrinator, fake hero, and danger to youth. The worst came when someone vandalized his car. Slurs scratched into the pant. A dead crow left on the windshield. That night, for the first time, Cade didn't go home. He sat in his car in the school parking lot, engine off, just staring at the building. Memories played like film reels. That first day, the defiance, the trust he had built with these kids. The hope, was it worth it? Was he strong enough to keep going? In the morning, he showed up to class as usual. But something was different. His voice lacked its usual weight. His eyes were distant. Even his post-defiant was now slightly slouched. Jess noticed. Malik too. And as the lesson dragged on, something shifted in the students. An unspoken understanding. Their hero was fading, and it was their turn to stand up. Malik closed his notebook mid-class and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You need to sit down." Cade blinked. "Excuse me, you heard me," Malik said. "You've been carrying this whole thing alone. That ends now." Cade tried to brush it off, but Jess stood too. "You taught us how to fight. Let us fight for you." Then Kaylee, Devon, then the whole class. One by one, they stood, refusing to let their teacher carry the weight any longer. It was more than symbolic. That week, the students took over running Legacy Project Live. They scheduled interviews with other educators. They launched a letter-writing campaign demanding reforms in curriculum freedom. They created a mentorship program pairing younger students with 3C veterans. And every time someone tried to tear Cade down, they responded. Not with violence, but with facts, with unity, with grace. But the pressure didn't stop. A state senator called for an audit of the school. The local education board began re-evaluating teacher independence guidelines. Everyone seemed to provoke another assault, and still Cade showed up. Still he taught. But inside he was nearing the breaking point. One Friday afternoon, after the students had gone home and the halls echoed with silence, Cade sat at his desk, staring at an email from the district office. They were reviewing his future placement. It wasn't expulsion, but it was a move. A polite way of saying, "You've made too much noise." He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He simply closed his laptop, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling. That's when the door creaked open. It was the last person he expected. Trey. The same Trey who had once tried to destroy him, the same Trey who had started it all. "I heard," Trey said, voice low. Cade didn't reply. Trey walked in, pulled up a chair and sat down. "I wanted to hate you," he said, "but you turned me into someone I don't recognize anymore." "Someone better," Cade sighed. "What do you want, Trey?" "To help," he said. "I still talk to people in high places. My dad, he's connected." Cade narrowed his eyes. "You think connections are going to fix this?" Trey shook his head. "No, but maybe they can slow it down. Maybe we can buy you time. Enough to finish what you started." That was when it hit him. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about legacy. about ensuring that what they had built in Room 30C couldn't be erased with a transfer or a policy change. And if the system wanted to move him, so be it. But before he left, he would burn his mission into the DNA of every student who passed through those doors. And that's exactly what he set out to do. The morning that would become the final lesson began like any other, with the soft hum of classroom lights flickering on and the scent of dry, erase markers lingering faintly in the air. But beneath the routine lay an invisible current of anticipation, the kind that hinted at change, at closure, at something important about to unfold. Cade stood by the window, watching students filter into the schoolyard below, his breath fogging the glass in short bursts. In his hand was a letter, folded and creased from hours of being opened, read, refolded, and opened again. It was official. His reassignment had been finalized. At the end of the week, he would be moved to a different school, a different district entirely, out of the reach of the media storm, the supporters, the controversy, and, most painfully, out of Room 3C. There had been no discussion, no appeals. The decision had been made quietly and signed off by officials too afraid to admit they were removing a man because he had done too much good. He hadn't told the students yet. How could he? How do you tell a room full of young people, many of whom found their voice through you, that you're being silenced? The bell rang. Students poured in, laughing, talking, joking. But when they saw his face, the room quieted almost instantly. They knew. Even without words, they knew. Jess was the first to speak. "It's happening, isn't it?" He nodded once, and that was all it took for the dam to break. Malik slammed his fist on the desk. Kaylee covered her mouth. Devon leaned back in his chair, blinking fast. "They're really taking you?" Cade stepped forward, holding up both hands. "Listen, this doesn't mean we lost. It means they're scared. It means we've changed something. And if I go now, it's not the end. It's the beginning." But Jess stood up, her voice shaking with restrained anger. "You said we write the legacy, that it lives in us. But how can we carry it if they erase you?" Cade looked at her, then at all of them, his heart pounding with equal parts sorrow and pride. "Because I've already taught you everything you need to know. Because you've already proven you're stronger than me. And because this, what we built, can't be erased. It spreads." That day, the lesson plan was abandoned. There was no whiteboard writing, no group assignments. Instead, they circled their desks and talked. Honestly, vulnerably, powerfully. Each student took a turn sharing what the class had meant to them, what Cade had taught them beyond subjects and grades. Malik spoke about how he'd always believed school was a trap until Room 3C became the only place he ever felt free. Kaylee said she no longer feared her own voice, and that one day she wanted to teach too. Even students who had remained quiet all year opened up. It wasn't just a goodbye, it was a declaration, a promise. By lunch, the entire school had found out. Other students filled the hallway outside Room 3C, writing messages on post-its and sticking them to the door. "You changed my brother's life. You made my sister feel safe. You taught my friend how to fight for herself." Hundreds of notes, a mural of impact, and in the middle of it, one message stood out in shaky handwriting. "You saved me." Cade stepped outside to clear his head, and there, standing by the flagpole, was someone he hadn't expected, Superintendent Rourke. His posture was tight, arms folded, face unreadable. Cade approached cautiously, here to oversee the extraction. He joked, but it was hollow. Rourke didn't laugh. "I came to say you won." Cade stared. "Doesn't feel like it." "You changed them," Rourke admitted. "You changed the way people see this school. See teachers. See themselves." He looked down. "You were right. I was afraid." "Still am." Cade said nothing. Rourke continued. "The reassignment won't be reversed. Too much noise. Too many politics. But I'm not here to gloat." He reached into his coat and handed Cade a sealed envelope. "This is from the governor's office." They saw the viral video, saw the movement. They're starting a new initiative, statewide mentorship programs. You're the first name on the list." Cade opened the letter slowly. Inside was an offer to lead a pilot education program focused on trauma-informed teaching, empathy training, and student voice. A model based on Room 3C. He read it once, then twice, then looked up. "What if I say no?" Rourke shrugged. "Then they'll find someone else. But it won't be you. And it won't be real." That night, Cade didn't sleep. He sat surrounded by student letters, projects, photos. Every desk held a memory. Every corner whispered of transformation. He thought of the pain, the threats, the sacrifice. And then he thought of Malik's fire, Jess's defiance, Kaylee's clarity. He thought of Trey, of the apology that never came in words but echoed in actions. By sunrise, he had made his decision. The next day, his final day, he arrived early and wrote one word on the board in big, bold letters: endurance. When the students arrived, he stood before them, not as a broken man, but as a fulfilled one. "Today," he said, "isn't the end. It's the final lesson, and the lesson is this: change takes endurance. You can't just spark a fire, you have to keep it alive." He handed out blank cards and asked each student to write what they would do with everything they'd learned. Not as an assignment, but as a vow. They filled the cards silently, tears in their eyes, and placed them at the front. Malik said, "I will never let silence win again." Jess wrote, "I will build what they tried to destroy." Kaylee, "I will teach truth." Devon, "I will speak even when my voice shakes." Dozens more. Cade collected them all and placed them in a black box labeled Legacy. Then he turned back one last time and said, "No matter where I go, this box is coming with me, because this is proof that what we did matters. And you are the proof that it will continue." When he walked out of Room 3C for the final time, the hallway was lined with students and teachers. Silent, unified. As he passed, they held their hands over their hearts, not in salute, but in solidarity. Outside, news cameras waited. Reporters shouted questions. Cade ignored them all. He looked into the camera for Legacy Project Live, now manned by Jess and Malik, and simply said, "This is what real education looks like. Not tests, not fear, but truth, compassion, courage. If you believe that matters, subscribe, join us, carry it forward." And then he walked away, not as a man defeated, but as one who had ignited a fire no force could put out.